A giant cowboy saw handprints on his cook's face. What he did next shocked the whole town. The sun rose slowly over the small town of Redstone, painting the dusty streets with golden light. On the outskirts of the town, past the fields of tall grass and the line of wooden fences, lay a large ranch. It was a place known by everyone in town, not just because of its size, but because of the man who ran it. The townspeople called him the Giant Cowboy. He was a man of extraordinary size, broad-shouldered, tall, and strong in a way that made people both admire him and feel a little intimidated. Yet, despite his intimidating appearance, those who knew him well understood that he carried a gentle heart beneath that rugged exterior. This giant cowboy had a presence that could fill a room without a single word. When he walked into the local store or even the town square, people noticed. Children would peek from behind their parents, and adults would nod respectfully. But what made him different from others of his size and strength was his sense of fairness, his patience, and his deep care for the people around him. He had grown up in these lands, learned the ways of ranching, and earned the respect of everyone through years of hard work and unwavering honesty. On this particular morning, the air was crisp and quiet. Birds chirped lazily, and a soft breeze stirred the dry grass. Inside the ranch kitchen, the smell of fresh bread and sizzling bacon filled the air. The cook, a woman named Clara, was already busy at her station, humming a tune under her breath. Clara was known in the town for her warmth and her incredible skills in the kitchen. She was not just a cook, she was the heart of the ranch. She had worked there for many years, preparing meals for the ranch hands, the cowboy, and anyone who passed through. She had a gentle smile, a kind voice, and a way of making everyone feel welcome, no matter how rough their day had been. As the giant cowboy stepped into the kitchen, he noticed something unusual. It was subtle at first, but then his eyes focused, and his sharp instincts told him that something was wrong. Clara's usually radiant face bore handprints, smudges that were pale against her skin, faint yet unmistakable. They were not marks from flour or cooking. These were the marks of fear and struggle, impressions left by someone who had tried to harm her. The cowboy stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing slightly as he examined her face. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she pressed her lips together as if holding back tears. Clara noticed him looking and quickly tried to cover her face with her hands, but it was too late. The cowboy had already seen. His heart tightened, not with anger yet, but with concern and a protective instinct that ran deep in his veins. "Clara," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of authority without being harsh. "What happened?" Clara hesitated. She looked down at her apron, her fingers twisting the edge nervously. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. I had a run-in last night on my way home." The cowboy stepped closer, his towering frame casting a shadow over her, yet there was no threat in his posture. Only concern. "Tell me," he urged gently, kneeling slightly so he wasn't looking down at her too sharply. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I was walking through Main Street like I always do. I didn't see him at first. Then he grabbed me, tried to." Her voice faltered and she shook her head. "I got away, but—" She trailed off, her hands trembling. The cowboy placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now, you're here. Nothing can happen to you while you're at the ranch." His voice was calm but carried a firm promise. He knew that words alone were not enough, but in that moment they mattered. Clara nodded, trying to absorb the comfort that his presence brought. The other ranch hands had begun to notice the tension in the kitchen. They looked from Clara to the cowboy, sensing that something serious had happened. Yet, the cowboy did not want anyone else involved just yet. He understood that rumors spread quickly in a town like this, and once something like this became gossip, it could spiral out of control. People might panic or react wrongly. He needed to understand the situation fully before taking any steps. Clara took a moment to compose herself. The cowboy watched her silently, giving her the space she needed. It wasn't just her safety that concerned him, it was her dignity. She was a proud woman, strong in her own way, and he respected that. He didn't want her to feel ashamed or humiliated. Finally, she spoke again, her voice steadier now. He tried to hurt me, but I fought him off. I ran as fast as I could and I made it home. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want to, make a scene. The cowboy nodded slowly. You did the right thing coming here, you're safe, and I promise we'll handle this. You won't have to face it alone. His voice carried not just reassurance but a promise of action. He knew he couldn't let this go unanswered. Not just for Clara, but for the town, for the sense of safety that everyone deserved. Clara looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and gratitude. Thank you, I didn't know who else to turn to. The cowboy smiled faintly, a rare soft expression on his rugged face. You turned to the right person. Outside, the town was waking up fully now. Children ran along the streets. Merchants opened their shops, and the smell of fresh bread from the bakery mingled with the morning air. Life went on, unaware of the quiet storm brewing on the ranch. The cowboy knew that what happened to Clara could have happened to anyone. That knowledge made him even more determined to act, not with anger but with precision and fairness. He looked at Clara again, studying her face carefully. He could see the faint traces of fear still lingering in her eyes. But there was also resilience there. She had fought back. She had survived. That strength reminded him of why he respected her so much. She was more than just a cook. She was a fighter in her own right. The cowboy decided that first, he needed to gather the facts. He would talk to Clara in more detail, understand exactly what happened when it happened, and if anyone else might have seen it. He would need to plan carefully. His size and strength were known throughout the town, but he didn't want to intimidate anyone unnecessarily. He wanted justice, not fear. Clara began to recount her story in detail. She told him about the narrow alley she had taken on her way home, the sudden grip on her arm, and how she had struggled to free herself. She described the fear that had paralyzed her for a moment, and the burst of adrenaline that had given her the strength to run. She even mentioned the nearby street lamp that had flickered above her, casting shadows that had made her moment of escape more terrifying than it already was. The cowboy listened intently, asking questions only when he needed clarity. He didn't rush her, didn't interrupt. Every detail mattered. He wanted to know everything so that when he acted, it would be with certainty and effectiveness. He also wanted Clara to feel heard, to feel safe in sharing something so personal and frightening. By the time she finished, the cowboy had a clear picture of what had happened. He could see who the perpetrator might be, the path he took, and the timing of the incident. But more importantly, he saw the courage in Clara's eyes, the way she had faced fear and not let it break her completely. He felt a surge of protective instinct, not just as her employer, but as someone who cared deeply about the well-being of the people around him. He stood silently for a moment, letting the weight of the situation settle. Then he spoke, his voice calm but firm. You did well. You protected yourself. And now we'll make sure nothing like this ever happens again, not to you and not to anyone else. Clara looked at him, a mixture of relief and awe in her expression. She knew that with him, things would be handled. She didn't know exactly what he planned, but she trusted him completely. As the morning continued, the cowboy went about his routine, but his mind was focused. Every detail of Clara's story replayed in his mind. Every shadow, every corner of the town where she had been vulnerable, he noted carefully. He knew that justice needed not just strength, but thought, precision, and care. By mid-morning, the ranch was buzzing quietly with activity. The ranch hands were busy with their chores, yet they could feel the tension in the air. They exchanged glances, aware that something important was unfolding, though they didn't yet know the details. The giant cowboy moved among them, calm on the outside but alert on the inside, planning his next steps carefully. Clara continued her work in the kitchen, but the weight on her shoulders had lifted slightly. She felt safe, supported, and understood. She realized that while the town might be unaware of the danger that lurked, she was not alone, and that made all the difference. The giant cowboy stepped outside, taking in the view of his ranch and the surrounding town. He could see the streets, the town square, and the paths Clara had taken. He was already forming a plan. He would act, but he would do so with fairness, with care, and with the integrity that had earned him the respect of everyone who knew him. And so, the stage was set. A quiet morning had turned into the beginning of a story that would shake the town, a story of courage, protection, and justice. The handprints on Clara's face were not just marks of fear, they were a call to action, a signal that one man's presence could change everything. The day had begun quietly, but inside the ranch kitchen, the air was tense with unspoken worry. Clara had returned to her cooking, her hands steadying as she worked with the knife and stirring spoon, but the marks on her face told a story that she could not hide. The giant cowboy had noticed them first thing in the morning, and now, as he leaned against the doorway of the kitchen, he watched her carefully. His mind was turning over every detail she had told him earlier. The images of her struggle, the handprints on her face, and the fear in her eyes were vivid. He knew he could not ignore them. This was no small matter. Clara paused for a moment, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked up at him, her eyes meeting his, and for the first time that morning she spoke more freely. "I didn't want to worry anyone. I thought I could just move on. I didn't want to make a fuss in town." Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. The cowboy stepped closer, his boots making a soft thud against the wooden floor. "Clara," he said in a calm tone, "this is not about making a fuss. This is about your safety. You don't have to face this alone. What happened is serious and it needs to be addressed." She nodded, looking down at the floor. "I know, but I didn't want to get the police involved. I didn't want people to gossip, to think I'm weak." There was a pause, and then she added, I just want it to be over." The cowboy's eyes softened, but there was a firmness to his voice that made her sit up straighter. "You are not weak, Clara. Anyone who tries to hurt someone else shows weakness. You survived because you are strong." Clara felt a small sense of relief, but the worry in her heart still lingered. She knew the town could be unforgiving, and people often whispered when something unusual happened. But looking at the cowboy, she realized that she did not have to face the world alone. He was a man of action, but also of fairness. If anyone could handle this properly, it was him. He motioned for her to sit at the small kitchen table. "I need to understand everything. Tell me step by step what happened." Clara took a deep breath and began. "I was walking home last night like I always do. The streets were quiet and I thought it would be fine. I didn't see him at first. Then suddenly someone grabbed my arm from behind. He tried to, I don't even know what he planned. I panicked, I struggled, I fought him off. I remember running past the old store on Main Street. The lights flickered and I could hear him behind me, but I didn't stop. I ran until I made it home." The cowboy listened carefully, his gaze steady. He asked questions occasionally but never interrupted, allowing Clara to speak freely. "Did anyone see him?" he asked. "No, I don't think so," Clara replied. "It was late and most people were inside. I didn't recognize him and I didn't see his face clearly. But the handprints, they left marks on my face. That's how I know it was real. I wasn't imagining it." The cowboy nodded, his mind already turning over possibilities. He knew the town well. He knew where people liked to walk, where the lights were dim, and where trouble might hide. This wasn't just about Clara's safety. It was about the safety of anyone in the town who might find themselves in a similar situation. "Clara," he said finally, "you did exactly the right thing by getting away, and you did the right thing by telling me. I promise you I will make sure this doesn't happen again." Clara felt a flicker of hope. She had been carrying this fear alone, trying to convince herself that it was an isolated incident. But hearing those words from the cowboy, the man whose reputation for fairness and strength was known throughout the town, made her believe that justice could be served without shame or embarrassment. The cowboy paused for a moment and then spoke with careful thought. "We need to consider our options. I could go to the authorities immediately, but I want to make sure we have all the facts first. I don't want this to become a rumor that spreads before we know the truth. Do you understand?" Clara nodded. "Yes, I understand. I don't want anyone to think I'm weak or that I cause trouble." "You are not weak," he said firmly, "and asking for help is not causing trouble. It's standing up for yourself, which is brave. Remember that." The rest of the morning passed with quiet intensity. Clara continued her work in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and stirring sauces, but the cowboy remained nearby, observing, planning. He asked her questions about the route she had taken, the time of night, and the places she had passed. He wanted to be thorough, to understand everything so that when he acted, he would do so with certainty and fairness. By mid-morning, the ranch hands had noticed the quiet tension in the kitchen. They exchanged glances, sensing that something serious had happened, but they did not interfere. The cowboy had a way of commanding attention without raising his voice, and his presence alone communicated that matters of importance were unfolding. The cowboy decided it was time to gather more information. He would start by talking to people who might have been near the area where Clara had been attacked. He did not want to alarm the town, so he chose to approach this carefully, quietly, and respectfully. He knew that a sudden show of force could scare innocent people or make the situation worse. His goal was justice, not fear. Clara watched him as he moved around the ranch, making small plans in his mind. She felt a mix of relief and awe. Relief because she knew someone was taking action. Awe because she had seen many strong men in her life, but none had the calm, careful determination that the cowboy displayed. He was not only physically imposing but mentally sharp and morally grounded. By noon, he had gathered enough preliminary information to form a plan. He would not rush. He would observe, verify, and then take steps that were measured and effective. His reputation in the town meant that people listened when he spoke, and his size and presence meant that people thought twice before doing wrong. But he wanted to ensure that he acted fairly, without causing harm to anyone who was innocent. Clara continued her work, but she felt a growing sense of security. She realized that the cowboy's involvement meant that this problem would not be ignored or dismissed. For the first time since the incident, she felt a sense of hope. She could see the beginning of a solution, a path that would restore her sense of safety and dignity. As the afternoon approached, the cowboy returned to the kitchen. He had taken the time to think, to observe, and to plan. "Clara," he said, "I have an idea of what needs to be done. But first, you need to know that your safety is my top priority. Nothing will happen to you while we figure this out." Clara nodded, feeling the weight of worry begin to lift. She knew that she could trust him, and that trust gave her strength. She realized that she was not alone, and that made all the difference. The cowboy leaned against the counter, his large hands folded. "We will address this carefully," he said. "I want to make sure that the person responsible is held accountable, but we will do it in a way that is fair, that does not cause unnecessary panic, and that restores your sense of safety." Clara felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had lived in fear for a night, but now, with the cowboy taking charge, she could begin to imagine a day when she would feel safe again. She could see that justice was not just a word, it was a promise, and he intended to keep it. As the afternoon wore on, the cowboy made plans to quietly gather more information from the town. He would speak with witnesses, observe the streets, and verify the details that Clara had shared. He would ensure that every action he took was deliberate and measured. And all the while, he remained a comforting presence for Clara, someone who watched over her with care and vigilance. By evening, the first steps of action had been taken. The cowboy had mapped out the area where the incident had occurred, identified possible witnesses, and began forming a plan for confronting the situation in a way that would bring justice without fear. Clara prepared dinner, feeling a cautious optimism she had not felt since the incident. She could see that this man, this giant cowboy, was not only strong but also wise, fair, and compassionate. The town of Redstone continued its quiet evening, unaware of the careful planning unfolding on the outskirts. The sun set, casting long shadows across the fields, and the ranch was filled with the warmth of evening light. Clara looked at the cowboy and felt a sense of safety she had not felt in a long time. She knew that the next steps would be handled with thought, care, and integrity. And she knew that the town would soon see a side of their giant cowboy that went beyond strength, a side that would shock and impress them, a side that would restore faith in fairness and justice. The morning air was fresh and quiet on the ranch, but inside the main house, the giant cowboy was already deep in thought. After listening to Clara recount her frightening experience, he had spent the night planning carefully. Strength alone would not solve this problem. He needed patience, observation, and strategy. He was not a man who rushed into action without knowing all the facts. Every detail mattered, and he intended to act in a way that would protect Clara, hold the wrongdoer accountable, and maintain peace in the town. Clara had returned to her routine in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for the ranch hands. She was careful, chopping vegetables and stirring the pots, but her mind still carried traces of the previous night's fear. She glanced occasionally at the cowboy, who moved around the house with deliberate calm. There was a sense of reassurance in his presence, a feeling that everything would be all right. The cowboy called his trusted ranch hands together in the large dining room. These men had worked alongside him for years and had learned to trust his judgment. They were strong, capable, and loyal, but more importantly, they understood the importance of fairness and integrity. He explained the situation to them quietly, careful not to alarm anyone outside the ranch. "Clara was attacked last night on her way home," he said. "We need to handle this carefully. I want to make sure she is safe and that the person responsible is held accountable, but we will do it in a way that does not cause unnecessary fear in the town." The ranch hands listened attentively, their faces serious. They respected their leader's judgment, knowing that he would not act recklessly. One of them asked, "Do you want us to go into town and find him?" The cowboy shook his head. "Not yet. First, we need to observe, gather information, and make sure we have the right person." Acting too soon could make things worse. He had already formed a mental map of the area where the attack had occurred. He knew the streets, the alleys, the shops, and the few houses where someone might have seen what happened. His plan was simple but effective: discreetly gather information, verify facts, and then act decisively. After the meeting, the cowboy decided to speak with Clara again. He found her in the kitchen, placing freshly baked bread on a tray. "Clara," he said softly, "I need you to know that everything I do will be to keep you safe. I also want to make sure that you feel respected and supported throughout this." Clara paused, her hands resting on the tray. "I do," she said quietly. "I trust you. I just don't want things to get worse." "You won't have to worry about that," he replied. "I'll handle it, but I need you to remember, what happened was not your fault. You did everything you could to protect yourself, and that is more than enough." Clara nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest that she had not felt since the attack. She realized that the cowboy's approach was not about revenge or anger. It was about fairness and justice. That distinction mattered to her. Later that morning, the cowboy stepped outside and walked through the ranch grounds, observing the nearby town from a distance. He noted the streets Clara had walked, the corners where shadows might hide, and the few places where a witness might have seen something. He wanted to ensure that when he acted, he would have all the necessary information. He stopped at the edge of the town square and observed quietly. People went about their daily routines, unaware of the careful planning unfolding just beyond their sight. The cowboy noticed a few familiar faces, shopkeepers who often stayed late, and children who played in the streets. He made mental notes of anyone who might have been near Clara's route the night before. Back at the ranch, he gathered his notes and reviewed Clara's account once more. He considered the timing, the locations, and the possible actions of the person responsible. Every detail mattered. He understood that acting too quickly could risk targeting the wrong person or causing unnecessary fear. He wanted precision, not panic. By midday, he had formed a plan. First, he would continue discreetly gathering information from potential witnesses. He would speak with shopkeepers, neighbors, and anyone who might have noticed unusual activity. Second, he would ensure that Clara remained safe and protected at all times. Third, once he was certain of the facts, he would confront the person responsible in a way that demanded accountability but avoided unnecessary violence. The ranch hands helped him in small ways, checking the town streets and reporting back. They were careful not to alert anyone to the situation, understanding the importance of subtlety. Meanwhile, Clara went about her tasks, feeling increasingly confident that the cowboy's approach would lead to a safe and fair resolution. In the early afternoon, the cowboy returned to the kitchen to speak with Clara. He had learned a few more details from his discreet inquiries. "Clara," he said, "I've spoken with a few people who might have seen something last night. We are close to knowing who did this. But I need you to stay here safe while we sort this out." Clara nodded. "I will," she said, her voice steady. She had grown more confident in the cowboy's judgment. She trusted that he would handle the situation wisely, and that gave her a sense of calm she had not felt since the attack. The cowboy left her to continue her work and returned to the ranch house to organize his next steps. He reviewed the layout of the town, marking the paths Clara had taken and the places where witnesses might have been present. He thought carefully about the best way to confront the person responsible, ensuring that the action would be fair, firm, and effective. As the afternoon wore on, he made a few quiet visits to the town. He spoke discreetly with shopkeepers and neighbors, asking if they had noticed anything unusual the night before. Some had seen a figure moving quickly, others had heard a commotion, but no one had realized the seriousness of the situation. Each piece of information brought him closer to understanding exactly what had happened. Back at the ranch, Clara prepared dinner, her hands moving with practiced skill. She felt a growing sense of security, knowing that the cowboy was carefully planning his next steps. She reflected on the events of the past day, realizing how fortunate she was to have someone who cared deeply about her safety and well-being. She had lived in fear for a short time, but now that fear was slowly being replaced by hope. By late afternoon, the cowboy had gathered enough information to identify the likely perpetrator. He reviewed all the facts, ensuring that he would act based on evidence rather than assumptions. He knew that the townspeople would be watching and that any misstep could cause unnecessary panic or confusion. He wanted to act with fairness, integrity, and authority. He called his ranch hands together once more. "We have enough information to move forward," he said. "We will proceed carefully. Our goal is to hold the person accountable without causing unnecessary fear. Everyone's safety is our top priority." The ranch hands nodded. They trusted their leader completely, knowing that he would act with both strength and wisdom. They prepared quietly, ready to support him in whatever way was needed. As evening approached, the cowboy returned to the kitchen to speak with Clara. She had finished her work for the day and was cleaning up. "Clara," he said gently, "we are ready to take the next step. You have been safe all day, and you will continue to be. I promise you, everything will be handled with care." Clara felt a mix of nervousness and relief. She knew that the next step would be crucial, but she trusted the cowboy completely. His calm determination and careful planning gave her confidence that justice would be served without fear or harm. The cowboy took a moment to reflect. He understood that this was not just about one incident. It was about setting an example, about showing that fairness, strength, and integrity could prevail. He was not acting out of anger, but out of a deep sense of responsibility to protect those who could not protect themselves. The sun began to set over the town, casting long shadows across the streets and fields. The cowboy looked out over the town and thought about the steps ahead. He would act decisively, but he would do so with care, ensuring that Clara remained safe and that the person responsible faced accountability. He returned to the ranch house, his mind focused and determined. The day had been long, but progress had been made. He had gathered information, ensured Clara's safety, and formed a careful plan for confronting the situation. He knew that the next steps would be challenging, but he was ready. Clara prepared for the evening, feeling a sense of calm she had not experienced in the past 24 hours. She knew that the giant cowboy would not fail her, and that gave her strength. She reflected on his approach, realizing that his combination of strength, patience, and fairness was rare. She felt grateful and reassured, knowing that she was not alone. As night fell over Redstone, the ranch became a place of quiet anticipation. The cowboy reviewed the plan one last time, ensuring that every detail was considered. He knew that the next steps would bring the situation to a resolution, one that would restore safety, dignity, and respect. And so, the stage was set for the next chapter. The giant cowboy had gathered all the necessary information, ensured Clara's safety, and prepared to act. The town remained unaware, but change was coming, a change that would demonstrate the power of justice, fairness, and courage. The next morning on the ranch began quietly, with a soft golden light spilling across the fields. Clara had woken early, her mind still replaying the events of the past day, but she felt a sense of cautious hope. She moved about the kitchen, preparing breakfast with a steady hand, knowing that the giant cowboy had been planning the next steps carefully. He had not rushed into action, and she knew that meant he intended to handle the situation in a way that was fair and safe. The cowboy had already left the house before sunrise, walking through the town streets quietly, observing and confirming the details he had gathered the day before. He moved with a purpose that was calm but undeniable. People passing by noticed him, towering and confident, yet there was no aggression in his stride, only a presence that commanded attention and respect. Shopkeepers quietly nodded, children paused in their play to glance up, and adults instinctively gave him space. His reputation preceded him, and even those who had never spoken with him felt the weight of his character. By mid-morning, he had confirmed the identity of the person responsible for the attack on Clara. He had gathered enough evidence through careful observation and witness accounts to ensure that the confrontation would be precise and fair. The man in question had no idea that anyone was paying attention, and the cowboy intended to keep it that way until the right moment. He would act in a way that demanded accountability, but also upheld justice without unnecessary harm. Back at the ranch, Clara was finishing breakfast for the ranch hands. She glanced occasionally at the door, half expecting the cowboy to return and update her on his progress. She felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation. She trusted him completely, but she also knew that the next step would be significant. The tension in the air was palpable, yet there was also a sense of quiet confidence. She knew he would handle everything with care. The cowboy returned to the ranch house just after mid-morning. His boots thudded softly against the wooden floor as he entered the kitchen, his expression calm but focused. Clara looked up at him, sensing that the moment had arrived. "Clara," he said quietly, "we know who did this. We have confirmed the details and now it's time to act, but I need you to stay here and remain safe while we handle it." Clara nodded, feeling both anxious and reassured. "I trust you," she said. "Please be careful." "I will," he replied, his voice steady. "I promise that everything will be handled fairly and safely." He gathered his ranch hands and outlined the plan for the confrontation. They would move quietly into town, approach the man responsible, and demand accountability. The goal was not to intimidate or cause harm unnecessarily, but to ensure that he faced the consequences of his actions and understood the gravity of what he had done. The cowboy emphasized calm authority over aggression, fairness over force. As they approached the town streets, the atmosphere was calm but tense. People going about their daily business noticed the group moving purposefully but quietly. The cowboy's presence was unmistakable. Even at a distance, his towering figure and confident stride drew attention, yet there was no threat in his demeanor. He carried himself with a balance of strength and control that few could ignore. They arrived near the area where the attack had taken place the night before. The cowboy motioned for his ranch hands to stay nearby but out of direct view. He wanted the confrontation to be direct, focused, and controlled, not chaotic or public. He spotted the man responsible standing near a small shop, seemingly unaware of what was about to happen. The cowboy approached him calmly, his eyes locked on the man. "We need to talk," he said, his voice firm but not shouting. The man turned, startled, and immediately recognized the cowboy. He had heard stories of his size and strength, but seeing him in person, moving with quiet authority, was intimidating. The cowboy continued, his tone steady. "You know what happened last night. You tried to harm someone in this town. That cannot be ignored." The man's eyes darted around nervously, realizing that there was no way to escape the truth. The cowboy's calm but commanding presence left no room for denial or lies. The townspeople nearby began to notice the interaction. A few paused in the street, curious about the large cowboy speaking to the man. Whispers began to circulate, but the cowboy remained composed, keeping the focus on fairness and accountability. His method of confronting the situation without immediate aggression impressed those who were watching. They could see that strength was not being used recklessly, it was being guided by justice. The cowboy demanded that the man acknowledge his actions. At first, the man hesitated, stammering excuses and trying to shift blame. But the cowboy's steady gaze and unwavering presence left him no choice. He finally admitted his wrongdoing, his voice trembling as he faced the consequences of his actions. The cowboy did not raise his hand or shout. He stood tall and firm, embodying authority and integrity. "You will be held accountable," he said. "Not through fear, but through responsibility. You must understand the harm you have caused and take steps to make it right. This is your chance to correct your actions." The man, humbled and aware of the seriousness of the situation, nodded. He agreed to apologize to Clara and to take responsibility in a way that the cowboy deemed fair. The townspeople watching from a distance were surprised by the calm and precise way the situation was handled. They had expected a show of anger or aggression, but instead, they saw a demonstration of strength tempered by fairness and integrity. Meanwhile, Clara remained at the ranch, her heart pounding as she awaited news. When the cowboy returned later that day, she could see the relief in his eyes. "It's done," he said quietly. "He has admitted his actions and will face the consequences. You are safe now, Clara." Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her. She realized that the marks on her face, the handprints that had caused her so much fear, were no longer symbols of weakness. They were reminders of her courage and the way the cowboy had ensured justice without resorting to violence. She was safe, respected, and empowered. The town slowly began to understand the impact of what had happened. People whispered about the giant cowboy, not with fear but with admiration. They had witnessed the way he had confronted the situation, balancing strength and fairness in a way that few could manage. The story of his actions spread quietly, inspiring respect for the principles of justice and integrity he had demonstrated. Back at the ranch, life returned to a calmer rhythm. Clara resumed her work in the kitchen, preparing meals and caring for the ranch hands. Yet she carried with her a newfound sense of confidence. She knew that even in moments of fear and uncertainty, there were people willing to act with integrity and protect those who could not protect themselves. The giant cowboy had shown her that strength could be paired with wisdom and fairness, and that lesson stayed with her. The cowboy himself reflected on the day's events. He understood that true strength was not measured by size or force alone, but by the ability to act decisively while maintaining fairness and integrity. His actions had not only protected Clara but had also set an example for the town. People could see that courage, thoughtfulness, and justice could coexist, and that reputation was earned through character, not intimidation. Even as evening fell over Redstone, the ranch was filled with a sense of accomplishment and quiet pride. Clara and the ranch hands gathered for dinner, sharing a meal prepared with care and attention. The air was calm, the tension of the previous days eased by the resolution of the conflict. Yet, there remained a sense of vigilance, an understanding that while justice had been served, the responsibility to protect and care for one another never ended. As night settled over the town, Clara looked at the cowboy with gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't know what I would have done without you." The cowboy smiled faintly, a rare softness in his expression. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "You were brave, and you did what you had to do to protect yourself. I just made sure the world around you matched your courage." Clara nodded, feeling a deep sense of reassurance. She realized that the events of the past days, though frightening, had revealed the strength and character of those around her. She had learned that fear could be overcome, that justice could be achieved without aggression, and that integrity was a form of strength all its own. The ranch settled into a peaceful night. The fields glimmered under the moonlight, and the quiet sounds of nature surrounded the house. Clara reflected on the handprints that had once caused her fear. They now felt like a symbol of resilience, of courage, and of the power of one man's fair and thoughtful action. The town of Redstone would remember this day. Not as a day of fear or danger, but as a day when a giant cowboy showed that justice could be delivered with strength, fairness, and dignity. People would talk quietly about how he had confronted the situation without anger, how he had demanded accountability, and how he had protected someone vulnerable with care and integrity. And Clara, more than anyone, would remember the lesson he had taught her, that courage is not just about fighting back, but about trusting in fairness, in wisdom, and in those who act with a true sense of justice. The days following the confrontation were quiet on the ranch, but they were filled with a calm sense of accomplishment. The giant cowboy had ensured that Clara was safe, and that the man responsible for the attack had faced accountability in a way that was fair, respectful, and just. Life on the ranch slowly returned to normal, but the events of the past few days had left a lasting impression on everyone involved. Clara had begun to regain her usual confidence and cheerfulness. She worked in the kitchen as she always had, but now there was a new lightness in her steps. She felt empowered, not just because the danger had passed, but because she had been supported by someone she trusted completely. The handprints on her face, once a mark of fear, now felt like a reminder of her own courage and the strength of those who stood by her. The cowboy continued his daily routines, tending to the ranch and overseeing the work of the ranch hands. But he was also observant, quietly noticing the changes in Clara's demeanor. He saw the small smiles she gave to the ranch hands, the way she moved with renewed confidence, and the relief in her eyes. He knew that while the immediate danger had passed, the emotional impact of the incident lingered, and he wanted to ensure that Clara felt fully supported. One afternoon, he called Clara aside while she was preparing lunch. "Clara," he said gently, "how are you feeling today?" Clara looked up, her hands resting on the counter. "I feel better," she admitted. "I still think about what happened, but I feel safe now, and I feel like I can move on." The cowboy nodded. "That's good. You've shown a lot of courage." And I want you to remember that courage doesn't end when danger passes. It stays with you, shaping who you are." Clara smiled faintly. "I will remember. Thank you for everything." The cowboy returned her smile, though faintly, his expression thoughtful. "You don't need to thank me. You faced the situation bravely, and I just made sure justice was done. That's all." Word of the cowboy's actions slowly spread throughout the town. People began to whisper about the calm and fair way he had handled the situation, how he had confronted the man without anger or aggression, and how he had ensured Clara's safety. Unlike most rumors that distorted events, the stories about the cowboy emphasized respect, integrity, and strength guided by fairness. The townspeople were surprised. They had expected a show of anger or intimidation from someone of his size and reputation, but instead, they saw a demonstration of quiet authority and careful judgment. It was a lesson in how true courage worked, not through fear, but through fairness and integrity. Parents told their children about the giant cowboy, not to scare them, but to show them an example of strength used responsibly. Back on the ranch, Clara continued to regain her confidence. She laughed more freely, moved more confidently, and even began to share small details about the incident with those she trusted. The ranch hands noticed the change as well. They had seen her fear, her anxiety, and now they saw her resilience. It inspired them to act with care, responsibility, and fairness in their own lives. The cowboy observed all of this quietly, knowing that the best way to help was not just to act in the moment of danger, but to ensure that Clara could reclaim her sense of safety and dignity fully. He encouraged her subtly, allowing her to make her own choices and regain her independence. He understood that true protection was not about controlling her actions, but about empowering her to feel safe and confident in her own strength. One evening, as the sun set over the ranch, Clara stood on the porch, looking out over the fields. The light of the sunset reflected off the fences and the rooftops, painting the land in shades of gold and orange. She felt a deep sense of peace, a feeling that she had not known for days. The giant cowboy joined her, standing silently by her side. "You've come a long way in a short time," he said quietly. Clara looked at him, her eyes reflecting gratitude. "I have. And it's because of you, because of how you handled everything. You didn't just protect me, you made me feel safe, and you showed me that courage and fairness matter more than strength alone." The cowboy nodded. "That's the way it should be. Strength without fairness is nothing. True courage is knowing what is right and acting with integrity, even when it's difficult." They stood together for a few moments, watching the sun sink below the horizon. There was a sense of closure in the air, but also a recognition that life continued. Challenges might arise again, but they had proven that with courage, integrity, and support, even the most difficult situations could be overcome. The following days on the ranch were filled with routine work, but the events of the past week had strengthened the bond between Clara and the cowboy, as well as between the ranch hands and the community. People respected the cowboy not just for his size or strength, but for his fairness, his wisdom, and his ability to act decisively when needed. Clara felt a renewed sense of belonging and security, knowing that she was part of a community that valued integrity and courage. In town, the story of the giant cowboy's actions continued to circulate. It became a quiet legend, a tale told in small gatherings and over fences. People admired not just his physical strength, but his ability to act with fairness, restraint, and compassion. The man who had once been known primarily for his size was now recognized for his character, his moral strength, and the way he had inspired trust and confidence in those around him. Clara herself became an example of resilience. People in the town admired her courage and her ability to recover from a frightening experience. She spoke quietly to those who asked, emphasizing the importance of support, courage, and standing up for oneself. She credited the cowboy not as a hero who did everything for her, but as someone who had helped her reclaim her own strength and dignity. One afternoon, as Clara prepared a meal for the ranch hands, a young girl from the town approached her. "Miss Clara," the girl said shyly, "my mother told me what happened. I want to know, how did you stay so brave?" Clara smiled gently. "I was scared, just like anyone would be, but I had people who cared for me, people who helped me feel safe." Courage doesn't mean not being afraid. It means taking steps forward even when you are afraid, and it helps to know that there are people who will stand by you when you need them. The girl nodded, her eyes wide with understanding. "I hope I can be brave like that one day." "You can," Clara said softly. "Everyone can." Back at the ranch, the cowboy watched from a distance as Clara spoke with the young girl. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the lessons of courage, fairness, and integrity were spreading. His actions had done more than protect one person. They had set an example for a whole community. As the days turned into weeks, life on the ranch settled into a steady rhythm. Clara continued her work. The ranch hands maintained their routines, and the cowboy oversaw everything with his usual calm authority. Yet, the memory of the past events remained, a reminder of the importance of vigilance, fairness, and courage. The handprints on Clara's face, once a symbol of fear, now represented a story of resilience, justice, and empowerment. The town of Redstone began to see the giant cowboy in a new light. Children spoke of him with admiration, parents respected him for his sense of justice, and adults appreciated his wisdom. The story of how he handled the incident with Clara became a quiet legend, told not as a tale of violence or intimidation, but as a lesson in fairness, courage, and moral strength. For Clara, life regained its rhythm. She moved through her days with a sense of confidence and safety she had not felt before. She knew that challenges could arise, but she had learned that with courage, support, and integrity, even the most frightening situations could be overcome. She felt grateful not just for the cowboy's protection, but for the way he had respected her dignity and empowered her to reclaim her own strength. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the ranch, Clara and the cowboy stood together on the porch. The field stretched out before them, quiet and calm, a symbol of the peace they had worked to restore. "You've done well," the cowboy said quietly. Clara looked at him, a small smile on her lips. "So have you. You didn't just protect me, you showed me what true courage and fairness look like." The cowboy nodded, his eyes reflecting a quiet pride. "It's something we all need to remember. Strength is nothing without integrity. Courage is nothing without fairness, and together they can make a difference in the world." Clara nodded, feeling the truth of his words. She understood that the events of the past week had changed her, the cowboy, and the town. They had all learned that courage, integrity, and support were powerful forces, capable of overcoming fear and restoring trust. As night fell over Redstone, the ranch was filled with a calm and peaceful energy. The handprints on Clara's face were gone, replaced by a sense of confidence and empowerment. The town had learned a valuable lesson in fairness, justice, and courage. And the giant cowboy had proven that true strength was not measured by size or force, but by the ability to act with integrity, compassion, and thoughtfulness. The story of that week would remain in the memories of Clara, the ranch hands, and the townspeople for years to come. It was a story not of fear, but of resilience, not of violence, but of fairness, not of weakness, but of courage. And it would continue to inspire those who heard it to act with integrity, to support those in need, and to remember that true strength is always guided by wisdom and compassion.